Hello and a very warm welcome to our University of Exeter Institute of Cornish Studies Environment and Sustainability Institute event entitled Towards a Greener Future, Natural Capital and the Leading Role of Rural Areas. For us, this event grew up out of our deep awareness about the need to move forward in a much more environmentally sensitive way. Rural areas were built on their environments, quite literally. The histories of our rural communities are about the close relationship between our specific environments and the kinds of things that our forebears were able to do in order to support themselves. So, the fact that we join you from a region with a proud tradition of fishing and farming and mining, and that still does those things to a greater or lesser degree, is a result of the very specific environment and natural capital that Cornwall in the southwest of the UK is blessed with. Our natural capital has shaped our past and our present and our future, and means that we can be quite literally at the forefront of working towards a more sustainable future.
Our event is made up of 4 films, each designed to be of interest individually or viewed as a series. In our first film, PhD student Nick Walgrove of the Environment and Sustainability Institute is going to outline the key ideas behind the series, discussing the potential to invest in natural capital in peripheral areas as a development strategy. He's been working with Cornwall Council's Leading Edge project, which aims to do this in the UK. Next, Eilish Cownham from the Institute of Cornish Studies will build on this work, using her overview of research about Cornwall to showcase how our culture and heritage has quite literally grown out of our natural capital and how that will continue to happen in future. In our third film, Madeleine Eriksson from Umeå University in Sweden, John Provo from the Centre for Economic and Community Engagement at Virginia Tech University in the USA, and Donna Pickard from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences are each going to talk about natural capital in their regions. Finally, we get everybody together for a round table to discuss the differences and similarities between our stories in different parts of the world, and hope you'll join us for all these events.
The Britain's Leading Edge network is a collaboration of 12 rural authorities without major cities, and especially the latter is a key defining characteristic of Britain's Leading Edge, because none of our areas have a large urban centre nearby, which would give them an agglomeration effect.
So the regional policy that has been so far developed in the UK to reduce uneven development has largely failed to stem spatial inequalities. And while most modern economies are characterized by geographical inequalities, the spatial disparities that are long evident in the UK are deeply entrenched. And a major factor in this has been that policy has often ignored the unique differences between areas, especially in its inclusion of the particular characteristics of peripheral regions. So, and this is also coupled with the concentration of political power in London and that centralisation of policy and practice, favouring decisions that promote a greater economic agglomeration in cities. So, in the round, causing the neglect of rural and peripheral regions.
Probably when you ask most people to describe Britain's Leading Edge, they'd use words like rural, farming, countryside. So pretty much the opposite of an urban centre, which is cosmopolitan, it's thriving, it's hip. And yes, it's true, we have a great agricultural sector, we've got a very proud farming community, and we do have beautiful countryside. But we are so much more than that. Britain's Leading Edge areas actually sit at the heart of the UK green industrial revolution. We have the clean growth technologies that will drive our carbon zero economy, such as floating offshore wind. We provide a secure supply of renewable energy. However, due to the misconceptions that surround our areas, we have often lacked investment in these areas. And as a result, even though the UK is one of the richest regions in the OECD, we're also one of the most unequal. And so what we're trying to do through Britain's Leading Edge is to change that narrative around what our areas have to offer and really show the great contribution they could make to the carbon zero economy.
So, regional policy has historically privileged an urban research agenda, and it's left the rural periphery understood really only in relation to the needs of the centre. Periphery could be defined as areas on the edge of the nation, so both geographically in terms of their proximity to cities, but also politically in terms of their remoteness from national government and from policy. But peripheral areas in England are characterised by many unique features, and most notably is their richness of natural capital, which is set to play a key role in underpinning the UK's transition towards more sustainable forms of economic development. So it's the increasing prominence of place-based intervention combined with the growing value of natural capital, which has brought the periphery into sharp focus. But in England, there's still so much we don't understand about how decentralisation and devolution will play out, and how government policy and investment can best serve peripheral and rural areas. There are also questions that remain as to what transferable lessons can be brought forward to develop this place-based strategy for peripheral areas. So pulling them out of historic paths of stagnation, and creating new channels of opportunity that promote resilience and could promote sustainable growth. And it's Cornwall and it's the Britain's Leading Edge collaboration that are uniquely placed to answer some of these important questions.
Natural capital has always been at the heart of Cornwall and has held a valuable place in the formation of a distinct Cornish identity. In this film, we are going to share with you the natural capital work that the University of Exeter, along with other partners, have been doing regarding our past, present and future. As you will see, this falls into 3 categories, which are mining, maritime and agriculture. Many of our scholars have explored the history of mining in Cornwall. It is likely that tin has been mined here since the 2nd millennium BCE, and the need for deeper mines came with the demand and discovery of copper, and thus our iconic engine houses began to pop up from the 1750s. While some cry the death of Cornish mining with the collapse of tin and copper mining in the late 19th century, China clay mining continued and thrived and still continues to this day. More recently, our need to become carbon neutral means an increased need for lithium for battery storage, and teams are piloting an early phase of lithium mining. Our LIFT project aims to identify the types of deposits that can be extracted profitably whilst minimising environmental damage. Our research has shown just how important the maritime sector is to the local economy. It is valued at 1.1 billion with an estimated 855 active maritime businesses. Our TEVI Business Support Project works with a number of businesses to help them become more sustainable, and as part of this, we are also working with local companies which salvage marine plastics and make them into products as diverse as swim and thermal wear, kayaks and municipal waste bins. This is underpinned by our exploration of a circular economy in plastics, ensuring that they don't go to waste. 2 key projects around agriculture relate to exploring new crops. For example, we are looking at seaweed farming and using detailed local climate mapping to understand better where we might grow different kinds of crops to be as sustainable as possible. A few words about seaweed as an agricultural product. It is really versatile and can be used as food, biofuels, bioplastics, medicine and even clothing. It also has benefits in combating ocean acidification and helps widen ecosystems. Cornwall and the Southwest are playing a key role in seaweed agriculture and our Lagos mapping tool. This helps in both these projects by helping people and businesses better understand the natural environment of Cornwall. This is just a tiny taster of our University of Exeter natural capital research, and we hope that you can see just how we are adapting our traditional industries to a 21st century environment.
My name is John Provost. I'm director of the Center for Economic and Community Engagement. I'm at Virginia Tech Polytechnic Institute and State University in Blacksburg, Virginia. in the central Appalachian region of the US. Virginia is a large, diverse state, runs from major urban centers outside our nation's capital, along the eastern seaboard to the Atlantic Ocean, and all the way back to the foothills and the heights of the Appalachian Mountains. We have a rich heritage of natural capital in the western parts of our state, in the mountains and the foothills and the valleys. We have done our best to develop those as assets, to consider how to grow robust food systems, how to celebrate and trade on our cultural heritage, how to connect these opportunities for trade with our growing a population and stabilizing a population, from drawing from our urban centers with interest in remote work in different locations that are less crowded and less challenged by the pandemic. So I think the topic of natural capital is really at the heart of strategies as the state of Virginia really looks to rebalance and strengthen its efforts.
I'm Madeleine Eriksson, and I am here at Umeå University in northern Sweden. And I'm doing research on my region, northern Sweden, a really rural area with roughly 60% of Sweden and 10% of the population. And the population has been declining since the 60s, and natural capital has played a very significant role for the region as a source of wealth and a condition for the modernization of the whole nation. But characterizing for this region is also the colonial heritage, being a proper colony with the post-indigenous population, poor settlers working in the mines and forests, most of the wealth coming from the natural resources from this colonized area was and is until today mostly benefiting other parts of the country. Recently, regional policies have led to the kind of process where the rural areas' contributions to the national economy is made invisible in different ways. Instead, the rural northern Sweden is represented among politicians in media and popular culture and so on, as drawing from the reserves rather than contributing, and as an internal spatial other. So a notable example of this is the transformation of the berry industry. So that's my kind of focus now in my research. So the berry industry has been transformed into a transnational industrial relation system. Wild berries are the most common plant in Sweden and is collected in massive volumes in northern Sweden for commercial sale, primarily to Asia, to the health industry. The local processing is scarce. Instead, the processing is taking place in Asia. This means that significant economic opportunities are disappearing from northern Sweden. And northern Sweden is in great need of jobs and businesses nowadays.
My name is Donna Pickard, and I'm a sociologist, a rural sociologist from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology. And over the past 10 or 12 years, I've been researching the way the quality of life of urban communities can be increased, and the way that can happen through interactions with urban communities as well. In Bulgaria, we do have quite a varied forms of natural capital, including extensive forests, wind power, water sources, and so on, and also fossil fuels in form of natural gas. Our country has in place quite a few regulations and policy measures to preserve natural capital for the best use of it. But in reality, what is happening is that the use of natural capital is very often subject to illegal activities or corruption, and this is because the conflict between the way of using natural capital for the interest of the local communities and external business or capital forces is oftentimes solved through such corruption methods. This happens with, for example, renewable sources where local rivers are dammed and locals cannot use the waters for irrigation anymore, or such loads of other examples that I can give you later in the discussion.
First of all, we'd like to say a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here, and I know that rural and peripheral development is very important to all of us in the regions that we're exploring. So today, we're going to talk with you about this in a lot more detail, because obviously in the short films that we've just heard that you've all helped make, obviously there was not very much that you could raise in them. So this is where we get to talk about your regions in a lot more detail. Okay, I want to open with a question to you, John, if I may. So in each of our regions, our communities were built on their natural capital and so have a long history of working with it. How did our regions find themselves from vibrant or lively, with lots of stuff, lots of natural resources, but then how did they find themselves becoming peripheral or declining? And is there anything that we can learn from that? Over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Jenny. I'm in central part of the Appalachian Mountains, and I'm really in an area that is quite large, and I think as we've developed over time, it's a very classic story of natural resource extraction. It's a very classic story of wealth transfer to ownership outside of a region, and as resources begin to play out. Our jobs, say in coal manufacturing, have actually been declining since the 1920s. There are large parts of this region where my main campus is located that really haven't been in that business substantively for quite a while. So it's been a long, slow transition, really. But I think definitely in the last I'd say 15, 20 years, there's been a concerted effort to reconnect with natural capital values, if I can say, reconnect with the land. There's a taste and a flavor for authenticity that we're finding, and I think as we deal with right-sizing certain systems as we move hopefully toward the end of the pandemic, I think there's a great opportunity in our state to essentially rebalance some of the interests population has in being in different places and maybe closer connections to that natural capital in a location where they can still connect with a larger metropolitan economy, if that follows.
Cool, thanks for that, John. Donna, can we come to you next, and you can tell us a little bit about Bulgaria and how the way that historically Bulgaria has or hasn't been able to utilize its natural resources?
We do have this special characteristic of having political regime change over a period of 50 years between the Second World War and then the end of the 80s. And these political changes within such a short time span caused quite a shake in rural areas, in the way agriculture was planned, and of course in Bulgaria, agriculture during socialist times was probably one of the biggest ways to exploit natural capital, forestry as well. But because your question focuses on how did they become peripheral, what happened? Well, when you have a big kind of shift in way of thinking of what you can do with your land, because your land is expropriated and then it is returned 50 years back. You really don't know what to do with it. So a lot of people left the villages, first in the 70s and then in the 90s. So over these 2 or 3 waves, rural areas became depopulated. And this led after itself completely different attitude to natural capital as well. Because when you are deprived of a local community who cherishes it, which grows on it, you then transpose the responsibility for those areas, natural capital, to central planning or to private capital and so on. So in the end, local people were just disappeared. Schools were closed, medical centers were closed, and now it's quite difficult to rebuild them. So that's the answer to your question. What happened? So they became peripheral. Basically, they became depopulated. That was the reason. The basic, very very simplified reason.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It's interesting too. So John was giving us a story about how a natural resource has been heavily exploited, but the benefit wasn't really seen so much in the local area, and that then when that disappeared, there's an opportunity to start looking at the natural environment in a very different way. And the example that you've given us, Donna, is one of a region where actually the rural areas have been hugely affected by the political situation and the role of that political situation in shaping local policy, which reminded me a little bit of Nick's film, and thinking through about the role of policy and planning in or in not, in the instance that you gave us, really connecting with local people. Madeleine, I wonder whether you can tell us a little bit more about the history of northern Sweden and how that's developed over time.
Yes, I don't want to go far way back in history, but no, I think the development in Sweden resembles what John is talking about. It's a very classical story about wealth transfer to urban areas and people left behind in the rural areas, and a regional policy that hasn't really compensated these areas enough. But also, I think a political will for modernization, a political will for urbanization. So at least in Sweden, it's very, very clear that the politicians during the social democratic project really wanted modernization. They wanted to escape from the rural areas to the city, to the future and progress. So I think, and I can also say that, I mean, the contemporary politicians are rarely talking about the natural resources in the periphery in northern Sweden and the value that it has for the country. I mean, they choose to talk about the tech industry or small gaming companies in the cities and so on. So I think, that's the kind of story for Sweden, obviously very, very simplified. But I think, I mean, when you talk about what we can learn, I think that from what I hear from the films of Cornwall, and I mean what's happening in Cornwall right now, I also see a similarity in northern Sweden, where I mean there are just now big investments in northern Sweden, like green industry, and I think what we can learn is that perhaps the green industry is not that green as they say they are. We see, I mean, big investments in for instance, data centers. Facebook is investing in northern Sweden in renewable energy, for instance, and the small municipalities here are like paying them to come here, and then Facebook, obviously it's part of their strategy to become more environmental friendly, and I see a problem there, obviously. I mean, it's just not really contributing to jobs, it's not contributing to a sustainable future at all in Sweden or anywhere else. So I think we can learn from the past. When I don't think that local politicians have learned that much from the past, actually, in the Swedish case. So I'm a little bit worried for these big investments that are said to be green.
Interesting, and I found it fascinating, the story that you're telling there, Madeleine, about the way the tradition, I'm going to put in inverted commas, traditional industries or traditional rural industries are seen as not being kind of the future, whereas what we want is more tech. Which reminds me of, I'm pretty sure, Jane, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, but the Camborne School of Mines that we have at the University of Exeter, they often say things like that everything that we use was either grown or mined. And actually, you extend that a little bit further, those things that we grew or mined came from rural areas way before all of the tech stuff happened. So in that respect, it seems that, the rural is ferociously important, and yet you highlight the point there, Madeleine, about the way that rural enterprises or whatever are imagined in quite a negative kind of way. That's really interesting. Don, I can see that you've got a point that you want to make in just a minute. I just want to bring in Eilish and Nick very, very briefly, if that's okay. If we could go to you first, Eilish, as you've got expertise historical expertise.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about the story of Cornwall? Or?
Yeah, and what happened in Cornwall? How Cornwall went from being such a, kind of like the forefront of the Industrial Revolution to not.
Yeah, I was trying to think then, gosh, how do I summarize this? But yeah, so Cornwall has always had a really, really long history of mining, basically as far as you can go back. People have been mining in Cornwall, and it was at the forefront of mining, at the forefront of industrial. Cornwall was the first place to industrialise in the whole of Britain, and the first place to deindustrialise, which brings its own issues in terms of environmental degradation. And with the process of deindustrialization. So yeah, it was the forefront of innovation. There was so much amazing innovation and invention going on here in Cornwall. And it feels, looking back, that it just kind of vanished. Mining in Cornwall was very lucrative and a very risky business. And it didn't always work out. And evidently, it just became unprofitable to continue mining, or at least to continue mining tin and copper. So clay mining is still carried on, but just not as big on scale. So you don't just really, when people think of mining in Cornwall, they think of tin and copper, West Cornwall, the idyllic sort of engine houses. That's what people think of, the ones right by the coast, which understandably they're very beautiful. But yeah, I feel like the decline happened sort of overnight. And then because of the decline, we had the Cornish diaspora, and similar, there was just depopulation of Cornwall. And when you think that for a lot of the mines that are in pretty remote areas, whole villages would just be sprung up for the cause of mining, and then sort of in a pretty short amount of time, they'd be completely depopulated because there was no more work. So yeah, I feel going forward, in terms of more natural capital in Cornwall, it's an opportunity to use it more sparingly and perhaps in a smarter way than for how people used it before. But yeah, Cornwall is still at the heart of innovation with the lithium mining and everything. But hopefully, if lithium mining does turn out to be profitable, it will be used in a smarter way is what Cornwall needs in terms of its mining.
It's kind of quite interesting. On the one hand, you're talking about incredibly heavy industries, and yet one of the things that I sort of picked up on what you were saying there is about the way that tin and copper mining that doesn't happen in Cornwall anymore is heftily romanticized. I live in a clay mining district. Nobody really goes into rhapsodies about that. Nick, do you very, very briefly, is there anything that you want to add about natural capital and policy, and then we want to come to John and the point that you've got to make?
No, I mean, the only thing I was going to add to this, kind of looking back in history and kind of looking forward, I was just going to add the forward bit that Cornwall obviously, and Cornwall Council especially, does recognise its kind of unique opportunities to capture natural capital and to build a resilient local economy from its natural capital. But Cornwall is at the centre, or could be, from the peripheral perspective, in terms of fostering a resilient local economy built on natural capital. But it's also at the centre because the distinctiveness of peripheral regions' geography produces particular vulnerabilities to the changing climate, which natural capital is meant to be offsetting as well. So, Cornwall is an Atlantic peninsula. It's the furthest west and it's the furthest south. It acts as a breakwater and a breakweather for the whole of the south of England, and its many coastal communities are highly vulnerable to the flood risks, to the storms, to the erosion that's going to come with the changing climate. So investing in natural capital for decarbonisation and for climate change is not only good for a resilient local economy here, but it's also good to protect the places where the climate crisis is going to hit hardest and first. So.
Cool. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. John, you want to talk to us a little bit about amenity value?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, Madeline alluded to the sometimes disconnect between policymakers' thoughts about natural capital and tech jobs and tech sector development and such. I think we see a bridge sometimes in the U.S. Between the tech workers' interest in somehow connecting with a lifestyle around natural capital, around the outdoors, etc. And I think many policymakers have learned to speak to that and play to that. I won't say it's all rosy, though, because we still, as we've seen in U.S. politics in the last few years, we've developed a ferocious divide between our urban and our rural people around a lot of often, symbolic politics and choices. Joni, you talked about, the romance of the tin districts versus the romance of the clay mining districts. I didn't even know that was a thing. But we have a lot of folks who speak in rural areas rhapsodically about coal mining, and it's been gone for 4 generations in some spots, and they still sort of speak to that in a political sense. But the tools are there in the economy, I think, to build a bridge around the needs of people. But then the trick becomes, with this new, where we've seen new influx of tech workers seeking these amenity values, how to do it in a way that's both sustainable environmentally, but also socially, and doesn't become essentially rural gentrification.
this question about using about rural gentrification is a really important one, I think. Especially about how we actually move forward from this. Jane, I want to bring you in now. I think that you've got some things that you want to ask as well. I think we've literally got only 10 minutes left. I can't believe how fast this time is flying. But
well, John's picked up on this point about how different populations can be in tension with each other. So we have the iconography really around Cornwall is the surfer. So people who love surfing moving to Cornwall, often perhaps from those digital industries and so on, seeking a better lifestyle. And it points to the fact that we need to think about how we prepare our communities for the world that's to come. And if we are going to develop natural capital in a way that's more positive for the community than was done in the past, we need to think about how we create a value chain that keeps the value in our regions. I think that's a really critical question, and it's not clear to me yet how we do that. It's partly about policy, it's partly about supporting business startups, it's about skills and training, and it's about keeping local people at the front of the queue for those opportunities rather than them always ending up at the bottom of the queue. So it'd be great to hear if you've got any ideas about the kind of policy agenda around how we develop our natural capital in a more sustainable way as far as our communities are concerned. I don't know who wants to go first, maybe Madeline. That put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that you, in a sense, answered your own question. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I can only talk from my own context and my own research, and one of the reasons for me to choose some kind of such an odd natural resource as berries is because it is for me a kind of sustainable product. It is a wild product which grows everywhere in the north of Sweden. We have the law of a common access to land, so everyone is allowed to pick the berries. And just recently, this became an industry, as I was talking about in the movie or in the film. But I can see that we have different economic practices in perhaps all these regions that are, in a sense, invisible for politicians, for let us say the kind of system. I'm talking about, I mean, economic practices of perhaps youth or immigrants or women in these regions that might be interesting to take seriously to a greater extent. So now I'm perhaps romanticizing a bit, but I think that we can perhaps find those economic practices that are sustainable and don't destroy nature, amenity values, for instance. And also that, I mean, that are produced and also have a kind of a local market where we can actually sell these products to people. Everyone eats berry and jams in Sweden, but it's rarely Swedish berries. It's often imported berries. So we have all these different and really strange value chains that are very much hidden for us. And yeah, I don't know if that was an answer.
Yeah, definitely. And I hadn't really thought about that localization of the market thing that you've raised there, which is another aspect of this. So getting new actors involved in business, but then also serving local markets. But what about the situation in Bulgaria, Donna, that you raised? The political situation is very different there. How does this stuff speak to what's going on in Bulgaria?
Well, currently we are living in democracy, and this is really a difficult question. What to do so that the value from natural capital is kept locally and helps the development and quality of life of local people. Well, firstly, I think it's very difficult to say who are the, the rural communities, the social diverse. You've got people who come seasonally. You've got, as you say, the surfers or who come and buy houses and they rent them. But the bottom line is, as long as you have mechanisms, like legal mechanisms for these communities to have a say in those decisions that affect their future, I think that is important, and not just on paper, because we have a brilliant law in Bulgaria about local governance, but in the end of the day, it's got so many exceptions from it that there is little you can do. So I think there are loads of mechanisms that have proved to work to bring people together to discuss what they want, to reach a consensus, because within a community you will have different interests. And those work really well. And in terms of, for example, European policy, the leader approach, and now the community-oriented approach, that has done a really good job from the point of view of people sitting together to decide how they want to use their natural capital, how they want to live in their environment. So this, and then they lead to more civil action and to basically bearing responsibility themselves, not just relying on the politicians to come with decisions, but lobbying and organizing groups, pressure groups, and so on. So that, in cases for that, this has been the process, just local civil action.
Great. So it's nice to bring the democracy argument into this and civil voice. Very important. John, what's the story from the US?
Well, briefly, as our largest urban areas have pulled away and become truly global cities disconnected from their hinterlands, from their peripheries, I think we have a tremendous chance to rebalance. So the region I'm in, large, low density, but a few, we'd call them maybe fourth tier cities, I suppose. They would like to hear that, but 100K or less, I guess, And some of these are actually home to large universities who are anchoring some of those new tech economies and really hopefully can build relationships with their immediate rural hinterlands in ways that are less exploitive than was perhaps done previously. But that's the work, that's the discussion that has to happen to get that right, for sure.
Thanks, John. Over to Joni.
Cool. It's really interesting. I mean, this is one of the other themes that I seem to, personally, I feel like I've been hearing over the past nearly half an hour. This idea about connection and making sure that the economic activities that we do in our regions are deeply connected to both the people that live in our regions, but also the natural environment. And it seems to me like one of the things that we're saying is that both the natural environment and people are equally as important. Cool. Well, I think that this is a point to wind it all up. And I want to say it again, a massive thank you to all. I feel that we could have kept on discussing this for an awful lot longer. And I also feel that half an hour was definitely not long enough. So I think, yeah, there's a lot more that we could talk about. But thank you ever such a lot. And I hope that we can continue our discussions independently at a later date.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joni.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks all very much.